Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tonight, on a special edition of Behind the Headlines, a local perspective on the PBS documentary, American Creed. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Madeline Faber, managing editor, High Ground News. Thanks for being here. Reverend Earl Fisher is pastor at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Thanks for being
brother.
here. Absolutely. Yancey Villa Calvo is a local artist. Thank you for being here. So we're talking about American Creed. It was a documentary on PBS, a national documentary that airs, let's see, February 27th at 8 p.m., so I get that straight. And there's information about it on the website. And it's various perspectives on sort of the American experience, the American myth, the American dream. And for each of you, and I'll start with you, Yancey, what is, if American Creed, what does that notion, what does that idea mean to you?
For me, it's about the fundamental rights on how this country is based upon the liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness.
And your background, you were born in Mexico? Do I have that right?
Yes, so I was born in Mexico, Mexico City, and I've been here for 23 years in Memphis. I am not still a citizen yet.
You're not still a citizen?
No.
Is that right? You came here to go to CBU? Do I remember that correctly?
Correct. Yeah. I came as a student visa, and I've been here with many visas, and we just, after applying for many times, we are now, we just had the interview for citizenship, but, that tells you about how long it really takes, even if you go every single step of the way.
I didn't know that. You and I are on a board together, we're on the Overton Park board together. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Your husband, Mauricio Calvo, has been on the show a couple times. He runs Latino Memphis. That's great. Obviously very involved in all the immigration issues and the immigration discussion or fight or whatever you want to call it right now. You're an artist. You're involved with Memphis 3.0.
Right.
What else? You're involved with a whole lot of things in the city. And you're a mother.
I am a mother, yes, I'm very proud. And so mainly my art is about talking about diversity and inclusion. My latest piece is the one that I'm traveling around to spark a conversation and question, what are the laws that are not being inclusive and how can we change them in order to approach that. And it's called Barrier Free, which is now in City Hall. So we are very excited about that opportunity.
Right, and we'll come back to a whole bunch more about that. Let me get Earl Fisher, Pastor Earl. Your definition of this notion of American Creed.
Well, I think it's hard to define, and to echo some of what Sister Yancey just laid out in her experience. Number one, I think it's important for us to recognize that the creed, whatever it may be, is not applied equitably across the board for everybody. And even if we're sticking with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's paradoxical for most of the people of color when you look at policies that have been implemented and even the Constitution in and of itself having to be amended. When you think about Memphis, and I'm not a native Memphian necessarily. I was born in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and I came to Memphis in 1999 on a basketball scholarship to Lemoyne College, the HBCU here in Memphis. And so when you start thinking about what it means to travel from the north to the south, even though Malcolm X said everything south of Canada is deep south, then you experience a certain type of environment and ideology associated with the sense of being and this notion of who or what an American creed might be, and it's just difficult. You think about Memphis as the spot of the 14th Amendment and where it got its inception. So it's just difficult to try to nail down, and I think what we ultimately see is people from times past and even times present just trying to grapple with what it means to be American or whatever that creed might be.
You besides being Reverend pastor of New Abyssinian Church, sorry.
We'll work on it.
We're going to work on that. We're going to get that right. Is it fair to say you're a political activist? You've been involved in a whole lot of things. Black Lives Matter. Talk about some of the other things you've been involved in politically in Memphis.
Well, first, I think the avenue or the platform that I take to engage in all of these different measures is rooted in my spirituality. So I'm always living at the intersection of spirituality, scholarship, and social activism. And of course, if what I believe about my faith requires that I invest and engage in improving the quality of life for all of God's people, then it requires me to engage in certain political discussions and efforts and initiatives, because in order for us to maximize any social justice potential, you have to have some type of policy support. So over the past several years, more and more intensely and more intimately, I've been involved in trying to do some community organizing that empowers everyday citizens, especially at the grassroots and the living room level. That has led me to co-found a organization, Memphis Grassroots Organizations Coalition. I co-founded that with my dear sister, Tammy Sawyer. I've been a part of more coalitions in the past several years than I can count, but just been primarily trying to advocate for equity, whether it be economic equity and justice, whether it be fair housing, criminal justice reform, so on and so forth. And I'm also, in my spare time, I guess you could say, a PhD candidate at the University of Memphis in the communication department, and a husband to my lovely wife, Denise, and all that other stuff. And every now and then I sleep for 15 minutes.
There we go. Mally, you've been on the show before as a journalist when we do Journalist Roundtable, back when you worked at Daily News, and now since you've been at High Ground. But watching the documentary and this whole notion, what is American Creed from your perspective? What does that mean?
Well, personally, I think an American Creed exemplifies sort of the highest values of us as a nation. That doesn't mean that's where we are. I think that throughout the documentary, we hear people saying, oh, the American dream means aspiring to the place you want to be and striving for it. And I think more accurately, a verb would be overcoming. I think that certainly moving forward in life is an opportunity that's available to all Americans, all Memphians even. But too often people succumb to the pressures of racism, pressures of sexism, pressures of classism that I think maintain order in our society.
Yeah.
And so I think to be the best citizens that we can be and to try to live up to the creed and these values that are set forward for us, I think it's our responsibility to think, whose responsibility is it to relieve the gap between reality and between the promise that we have of the American dream? If it falls on the individual, I think we're misaligned as a society.
Talk a little bit about High Ground News for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah, so High Ground News is an online magazine. We've been around for about 4 years now, and it's all local news. And even more so, I'd call it hyper-local news. We do a lot of neighborhood-based coverage and embedded neighborhood coverage. So that means we put a team in a neighborhood for 4 months, videographer, photographer, writer, an engagement manager, whose role is just to communicate with residents about how they feel like they're portrayed in the media and sort of what that gap is, how they feel living in their city when it's not just defined by crime statistics, how they feel living in their neighborhood when it's not just, oh, the school is closing. It's what does it actually mean, you know, to call this place home? And how can we meet them on their level and sort of leverage the limited platform that we have to sort of put their voice in the center of it.
And you all are in a wonderful neighborhood right about now.
Yeah, one you're very close to, Pastor Earl.
The windy city of Whitehaven, as I call it from time to time. Yeah.
There are so many different places to go. I think I want to start with immigration. I'm going to turn to you because it's a big part of the American story, obviously, immigration of all kinds of types and the history. And it's a big issue right now. It's a big issue as we tape this. The Senate is debating what to do about DACA and the Dreamers. And so one thing that I think, and you hear it in this debate nationally, and I'm the white guy at the table in this conversation, so literally, I am the white guy at the table. And I remember watching, it was a documentary about New York, actually. It was Ken Burns' brother, Rick Burns, who years ago, almost 20 years ago now, did an incredible documentary on New York that's still relevant. And it's about New York City, but it's really about the American experience. And there's a whole lot on that I just missed when I was in high school and in college and in graduate school about the history of animosity and fear of Irish and Catholic immigrants. And that to me was one, for me personally, was this eye-opening moment thinking about the American experience of, I certainly knew the history of slavery. I knew the current history of antipathy towards Hispanic and Latino immigrants. I kind of missed the depth of hatred of Irish and Catholic immigrants. I don't know what my question is for you, but when you see all this from certain quarters, real animosity towards the Hispanic immigration and immigrants, do we get over this? I mean, is it going to be like the Irish, where we look back on that and go, I can't imagine that was real, that there was that much hostility toward white male Catholics in this country, but there was.
Right. So that's a very good point, talking about what other immigrants experienced. And as you mentioned before, we're all immigrants. Our parents, our ancestors, unless you're, Indian American, then we are all immigrants. So the fact that as an immigrant, when you're not living in the country, you have this U.S., that it really shows potential and you really want to get there because what is portrayed in the news, what is, oh my gosh, this is wonderful, this is a wonderful wonderful country. But then when you're here, then you realize that is not the case for everybody. So it really depends on how you look many times. And that is really sad because even if if you have an accent or if you don't live in the right community or don't have the access, it is really difficult for somebody to reach that American dream. So it's hard, but at the same time, I just feel that people here don't see the value that exists in the U.S. As being so diverse. Coming from Mexico, we don't have all of this diversity. So when I arrived, and then I met people from Australia and Malta and countries I've never heard of, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. It's just really wonderful to be in contact with the whole world in small communities. But then the fact that you should blend and not stand out. I don't think that is really what American means. It is, my husband really talks about a salsa. I mean, we don't blend everything that you don't recognize the taste, but it's more enhancing the flavor, enhancing the color. So right now, what we see, the Hispanic population migrates. Why? Because obviously, our neighbors to the south, so yes, obviously you're going to get more population from the neighbors, right, than from the north. Right. So when you look at what others have experienced and that now is shifting to other groups, then you wonder, well, why can we learn from somebody else? What the experience has been and how did they feel? And now we are in the other side, in the other position. We're like, okay, now I was accepted and I had all of these rights, but now, this is for me, but not for you. I'm afraid.
No, I think that's a beautiful presentation of the paradox that I tried to describe earlier, where she's laying out a line of demarcation between diversity and assimilation. And I think oftentimes, even when we talk about America as this melting pot, if you will, it is one that demands a particular type of assimilation. So going back to what you were talking about some of the Irish brothers and sisters, I think it was easier for them, even though they faced certain types of animosity and hatred, it was easier for them to assimilate if for nothing else. It was not as easy to stereotype them at a glance as it is to stereotype somebody in black and brown skin. Not only that, going back to this issue of policy, my mother has had the house that she lives in Benton Harbor, Michigan, southwest corner of Michigan, north, right? 90 miles east of Chicago. And she's had that house since, if I'm 39 now, I think she's had it maybe 39, 38 years. In the original deed to that house, it says in the deed, this house shall never be sold to a Negro. So we're talking about a house that was built in the mid-1900s, right? So 1950 or so. So these are policies. These are things that are published in print that can be leveraged in courts of law. And I don't think Irish brothers and sisters had to manage that type of terrain. And so as I'm hearing Sister Yancey lay out, you know, what it means to be a person of Latino descent, Hispanic descent, Spanish descent, and what it means to be somebody else of more English-centered descent, or, you know, white descent, black descent, and people who come and migrate voluntarily in hopes of certain dreams versus people who were forced to migrate here under certain conditions of economic exploitation of their labor. I just think the way that we approach whatever this creed is, and the reason I keep saying whatever this creed is because I understand democracy and even American democracy as a project. To Sister Madeline's point, it's not anything that we have really arrived at. It's something that we say we aspire to, and even trying to figure out exactly what it is we're aspiring to sometimes lands us back to this notion of, are we talking about diversity or are we talking about assimilation?
The housing thing is so interesting, and that has been a big focus. We've done as much as we can, you know, writing about the Daily News, and we've done shows about public housing here and talked about that because, and again, my naivete, and I'm the privileged one who could be naive about some of these things. That the history of housing segregation and redlining, the exact thing that is you know, codified in the deed in your mother's house, that people of color will live here and white people can live there, and banks can loan to the people where the white people are and cannot loan there to where the brown people are. There was a great Diane Rehm who is retired but did an amazing show on the history of public housing some years ago. I'll put it on Twitter or on Facebook or something. And it was about, they had a guy on there who said, look, if in 1950 you have two working class families who want to buy a house, and one's white and one's black or of color, the people of color at that time couldn't buy that house, so they couldn't build equity in the house. Whereas that same house bought in suburban New York or suburban Memphis or wherever begins to accrue equity. And then that couple, then when they get to be 50 or 60, they can use that money for vacation, to retire, to put their kids through college. Same African American or Hispanic or brown couple over here couldn't do that. Couldn't get the loan.
Irish could,
and an Irish could by the
could, right?
Absolutely.
And so lastly, I'll say, then I'll try to digress. When I think about, and I'm trying not to say too much about Memphis in particular, but some of what some of which maybe we'll come to it later, but some of what you just described when you start talking about segregated neighborhoods or even a certain type of economic gentrification, if you will. I mean, it still exists today, but I'm thinking more generally going back to this idea of immigration. And more recently, as the 45th president of the United States said this thing about S-hole countries. My response to my people at Abyssinian was, there are no S-hole countries. But you do have A-hole people who produce S-hole policies. You see what I'm saying? So I don't think we can understand our association with individuals and certain stereotypes associated with them if we're not willing to understand the type of policies that are put in place that force people to live in certain types of conditions.
You all have done a lot of writing about housing, about Foot Homes, the last of the big public housing projects. Your thought on you know, there's a lot in the documentary about economic mobility, and that is part of this American dream, that anybody who works hard and plays by the rules can become rich and famous or something like that. But economic mobility, again, back to is often tied to housing and housing projects, particularly the legacy of that. All cities, but we'll talk about Memphis, are still paying a price for it.
Yeah, so Foot Homes was built in the 1940s. I mean, it was built during segregation under racist housing policies. It's the last one to fall in Memphis. And public housing was built initially sort of as a temporary fix for people to get back on their foot. But what we see is that in ghettoizing poverty, in that particular area of Memphis where there were just a ring of public housing complexes, people couldn't get out of their neighborhood. And you see generations growing up within the same housing complex. I think that the American dream, as it's kind of sold to us, I think actually sees a longer arc of success. I mean, I was born into privilege, but my dad wasn't, and his dad wasn't. My great-grandfather was an immigrant from the Ukraine escaping the Nazis, you know. And it's taken all these generations of, you know, a family that appears white to finally reach me, and I can be in the position that I can be in. And families who grew up in Foot Homes didn't have that opportunity. And so I think that, you know, there are a lot of different facets to it. You know, it's challenging and in some parts very damaging to families who have been evicted from their units, the 420 units at Foot Homes, and scattered across the city. They've lost that sense of community. But I hope that when they return to what is built up in that place, a mixed income community that is just embedded with social services, wraparound support to help lift up residents and move them into a different echelon of economic mobility. I hope that they return to a place of promise, an opportunity that was denied and actually kept away from them for generations and decades.
It's amazing to me that the degree to which federal policy, that created these pockets of poverty. And the other one that's big, and you and I, again, being on the Overton Park board, and we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of one part of the fight to prevent the highway going through the Evergreen neighborhood, Overton Park. I mean, it's just across town. It's amazing to think about. I had a friend in town from Seattle recently, never been to Memphis. We were driving through Evergreen and Speedway Terrace and North Parkway, and he's like, this is just the most beautiful neighborhoods. He's just never seen such a thing. I said, yeah, there was supposed to be a highway here, I mean, and when you look at where those highways were put, across the country, Memphis included, they became another pocket of poverty because they were cut through neighborhoods, often through poorer neighborhoods, often through what were viewed as dying neighborhoods, and often through brown neighborhoods. And so it's fascinating to me. I mean, it's kind of the parallel to housing was federal highway policy, right. Blocking off communities and cutting out, again, economic mobility that was talked so much about in the show. We have 5 minutes left here. I would maybe talk about, it's interesting, the things. We'll never touch on everything that was in the documentary, but some of the things that bind people, and it was interesting, I think it was Junot Diaz, who talked about in his neighborhood growing up, it was incredibly diverse. It was kind of what you talked about, that suddenly he got to meet all these different people and see all these different people. One would hope that things like schools would be incredibly diverse, and that would be, and when I grew up, my school out west was actually fairly diverse, and that's where I got to know Black people, I got to know Hispanic people, and so on. In most parts of the country, the schools are not. They're segregated. It's still de facto segregation. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Again, the sense of diversity, and it's not only racial diversity, but religious diversity and economic diversity. It makes you see that it's not about an individual person or individual goal, but it's just a collective. How can we move forward? And if we are in our bubble, comfortable lives, and we don't make an effort to help those who need it or who have not been as privileged as us, then we're never going to be seeing the reality, what others are living. So definitely the schools have to, hopefully, the government invest more in education and support more of the schools, because most of the time, a lot of the kids from everywhere, that's the safe place, that they have for a day, and maybe the meals that are only going to be consumed that day for them. So having that space that, we capture these kids, it's awesome to be able to, teach them, and at the same time make them aware of their world and circumstances, and also push them to become whatever they want to become. And hopefully on the other side, at the level side, the laws being more inclusive, then they will be able to pursue that dream.
One thing that's interesting to me, and we just have a couple minutes left and not enough time to talk about this, but there is this lynching sites project, and I don't know how involved you are in that, but it's been, to some degree, it's an effort across the country to mark the sites where there were lynchings and to go through a process of recognition and healing, and I'm not doing it justice, but it is in Memphis, I think it is in most places, been an interfaith effort. Sure. Historically Black churches, historically white churches, churches from all of the city. Where do churches, because those also tend to be, you might think they'd be diverse, but they're not. I mean, I'm sure your church is probably 90-something% African American. Right. Episcopal church is Presbyterian. Right. How does interfaith activity, interchurch activity help, or can it help in this
I think it can help as long as it's done authentically. I think what we find, so the Lynching Sites Project, shout out to Randall Mullins and the group that's working with that, and Brian Stevenson has had something to do with that piece too. Other projects too that are faith-based, like Reverend William Barber's Revitalization of the Poor People's Campaign, I think is something that is bringing people together. The challenge is to make sure it's being done authentically and not being done cosmetically. because I think the desire for us to do this surface and superficial form of reconciliation without ever demanding through policy and other types of corporate practices that we do some transformation and some liberation ultimately means that even when we try to draw people together, whether it be under the guise of faith or religion, or whether it be under the guise of education or economic entrepreneurship, until these things are done substantively, we're going to continue to see ourselves in these cycles, and which is why 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King, you still have us on the front lines trying to fight for livable wages, putting more in education instead of incarceration, asking questions about health care and equitable contracting. So, of course, faith is a wonderful unifying principle, but I think it also demands a certain level of authenticity so that when we do come together, whether it be Sunday or Saturday or Wednesday or Tuesday or Friday, whenever we do come together, people are able to be their full selves and their best selves.
Isn't, we just have a minute left, so I'll editorialize for a second. I mean, it is interesting to me, and again, I mentioned I grew up out west in the out south of Seattle. I still have family in Seattle and Portland. I used to live in New York. New York different, but Seattle and Portland are not having this conversation. I can just tell you. And when my family comes down, when my friends come down, they are blown away at the diversity of this city. And maybe, I mean, for all its flaws. And it is an interesting thing that they always talk about is that in Portland, Oregon, you don't ever have to interact with anybody but a white person. You don't have to think about any of this stuff. And so I appreciate all your input. I appreciate you all being here. Please watch the documentary February 27th at 8 p.m. Thanks. Join us again next week.